This is augforums.com Real Talk, an unfiltered, independent perspective on Acumatica Cloud ERP. My name is Tim Rodman, and I want to mention 3 things in this pre-recorded intro before we get started. First, thank you to our sponsors. Our first sponsor is Paya. Paya offers Acumatica users a suite of industry-leading payment orchestration tools. Far beyond native Acumatica payments, Paya enables EMV, NFC terminals for counter sale. They offer a frictionless customer portal through their click-to-pay solution, and they support most e-commerce platforms and point-of-sale solutions used with Acumatica, such as One Retail and AcuPOS. And best of all, omni-channel reconciliation is available for all of their solutions. Our second sponsor is DataSelf. DataSelf Analytics is a revolutionary reporting solution that enables organizations to make the most informed decisions faster and easier than ever. It uniquely simplifies business intelligence, empowers anyone to build and access dashboards, and delivers critical business insight when and where you need it. Our third sponsor is 24/7 Digitize. 24/7 Digitize is an Acumatica bookkeeping service provider that helps derive the best value from your Acumatica investment by maintaining your books utilizing Acumatica's best practices and guidelines. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at augforums.com/sponsors. Our sponsors track clicks, and every click helps to support this podcast. The second thing I'd like to mention is that I'm always looking for victims. I mean guests. If you use Acumatica in any capacity, no matter how small, I'd love to talk with you. Check out augforums.com/podcast and click the link near the top of the page to learn more about being a guest on the podcast. Third and finally, I'd love to see you listed on my Rolodex. Check out augforums.com/Rolodex to find out who else is using Acumatica and read the instructions at the top to see how you can add yourself to the list. All right, that's it for the pre-recorded intro. Let's get started. Today is Wednesday, October 19th, 2022, and this is episode number 101, Daryl, Bowman, Amazon S3, and development side projects. Hey, Daryl, thanks for coming on today.
I'm happy to be here.
So I always like starting with the brief origin story for all of our guests. Maybe you could give us a little tour of where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you got into the world of ERP systems.
Sure. I was born and raised in Lancaster County, which is where I still live. New Holland is the town. I went to just a local grade school and high school here, and did not go to college, but my first job was as a maintenance coordinator, or yeah, I think that was my title. I worked under the maintenance manager, but at a home for mentally handicapped people. So it actually had nothing to do with technology or anything like that. But I worked there for, I think, like a year and a half, and got kind of tired of that type of work and branched out a little bit, tried some other things, but eventually ended up at the company that I'm still working for now. And the position was for IT. So I've been doing IT for going on 5-something years. And in that time, a few years after, maybe 2 or 3 years after starting, we were looking for an upgrade to the accounting system slash kind of a project manager tool that we were using, which no one will ever have heard of. But
Let's say it anyways. I always like hearing the names.
it was called XE700.
Okay.
I have no idea who developed it.
Do you know how to
I
spell
think
that? Xe? How do you spell that?
XE, just the letters
Okay. The letter
XE700.
Xe. Okay.
Yep. Anyway, I think it was actually kind of somewhat locally developed, or I'm not sure where it came from. And we needed an upgrade to it, and so I browsed around a little bit. I honestly can't even remember exactly how I stumbled upon Acumatica, but I think just through web searches or something. And one of the things one of the things that drew us to Acumatica was that there were hints of the system we were using in Acumatica. So it looked somewhat similar as far as like using a lot of grids to display data and letting you do kind of filtering and that sort of thing. But it wasn't cloud-based, obviously, and yeah, Acumatica had much more going for it. So that's kind of how I made an entrance into Acumatica. We implemented it locally, or yeah, for the company I work for, and then we actually became a partner. So I work for an accounting firm. I didn't say that. I work for Game and Accounting.
Oh, you became
And
a
have
partner.
you heard the
Interesting.
name? Oh,
No,
okay.
but
Okay.
the part the accounting firm part made sense after you said we then became a partner. Okay.
Yes. Yep. We became a partner. We have a lot of user or businesses that use QuickBooks, but QuickBooks at some point is no longer viable at a certain size business, and so we were like, well, maybe it would make sense for us to have another option of something that we could give to clients. um, so we became a partner, and in the process, I got 3 certifications for Acumatica. Actually 2 originally, and I added a third one a bit later. But we had 1 customer, and we actually helped with 2 implementations. But it didn't really end up being quite what we were hoping for, or whatever, and it ended up being something that we didn't really allocate a lot of resources to.
I'm curious. Can I ask on that? Here's my guess.
Yes.
Was it that your typical client was really more better suited for QuickBooks and Acumatica was a little bit too much for them?
Yeah, a lot of the businesses that we help or do services for are smallish, and
Yeah,
so the jump from QuickBooks to Acumatica is it's if you can make that jump handily, you were in QuickBooks way too long, or else you're getting to Acumatica a little too excuse me, a little too soon. So yeah, I mean it didn't. In fact, the clients that we implemented it for were not even our clients originally. So it really was not a fit for our clients
that
specifically.
makes sense. Yep, that makes
Um,
total sense.
and then we just didn't see a lot of um, I mean, to keep up with all the certifications and everything in order to be like a silver or gold partner where you actually can make some money I mean, there's a lot of certifications and people that need to be included, and it was just a lot. So either we needed to go big or go home, and we decided to go home.
And they
So,
keep adding the number of they keep increasing how many companies you have to sign on
right.
every year just to stay at
Yeah,
that
well, and
level,
that's
right?
the
Yeah,
thing. It's not
yeah.
like you just, build a base and then stick with it. You have to keep adding to it, and Yeah. So
I like
anyway,
to call it a pyramid scheme. I think that's what it is.
yeah. um, so anyway, uh, yeah. So the company I work for now, as an employee, is no longer a partner. Um, but we do still use Acumatica internally, and I still have all the knowledge and certifications that I originally got. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where I am at the moment.
And can you tell me what you use it for? Like, being an accounting firm, is it just accounting and then maybe time tracking, or what modules are you using?
Yeah, so we use CRM and case management.
Ah, okay.
So we kind of, yeah, we originally kind of used cases for almost project management in a sense. Um, but I think it does actually fit better than the project's module would. So we do time tracking, but within the case management module. Um, so I think cases were probably originally designed for more of like a support role, like MSP or IT or something, or even Acumatica support itself. But we use it as more of like if there's a particular, not really task, but a particular sub-service or for instance, we do a lot of taxes. So every year, each tax return for a particular business becomes a case, and then we track the case through as things are being done to it, and it's kind of a little container.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it works
Interesting.
well for us. So
Yeah, because you really are taking on, they're more like tasks. They're not like projects where they've got all these fingers and
right,
multiple layers to them. It's a
yep,
you've got a deliverable at the end, the tax return, or maybe you're doing
yep. A
bookkeeping, so
lot
you
of it
might
is
have
document
month-end
related.
close or
Yep,
yeah.
there's often reports or numbers, random stuff that is kind of going with it.
And did you customize it at all? I'm curious, if it's just out of the box cases or anything custom.
We did, so the workflows that came out, mm, forget which version, 21R1 maybe or something. Actually, no, I think even maybe back as far as 2020. Um, the workflow customizations that came out, we jumped on and we have fairly extensively customized. I think we have like 60 some case classes, which
Okay.
separates kind of the types of work that we do. And then we've customized a bunch of those to kind of behave in a specific way with like applicable reasons and um, action buttons that move it from one place to another. And there's some pretty cool stuff going on there.
And maybe custom statuses on the cases that you move it through different paths depending on what it is?
Not statuses as much as reasons, but yeah, I mean
Okay.
that's the idea that it behaves differently in certain situations, or different people see it here or there, or yeah.
And then that goes into billing on the AR side and then accounts payable and general ledger?
Yeah, yep. Um, we just started trying to use projects as more of a billing container, which cases could fall under. That is actually another customization that we did, which was to allow cases to be tied into projects because the activities on a case can be tied to a project, but the cases themselves are not really. So we basically it's a field that holds the project ID on the case, and then if activity is created under the case, the activity automatically assumes the project from the case, if that makes sense. So
Okay.
it's much faster entering activity than having to search up a project and project task. Um, but we haven't gone down that road real far yet. It's kind of a new thing that we're slowly inching into because it has more flexible billing options. So
So your company is no longer a partner, but you're still a customer, and it sounds like you're using Acumatica to enough of an extent where it was a good move for the company you work
oh,
for.
for sure. Yeah, we're I don't know where we would be if we were still using the old system, but yeah, it gives us visibility, workflow management. The customization itself is super nice. There are some things, details about customers, about our clients that we want to track that a lot of other businesses probably don't care about. For instance, the type of business or how they file their taxes or oh, there's lots of information, but so we actually added an additional tab into business accounts, which is entirely custom fields,
Okay.
and any fields that we can think of that we want to know, and then that kind of feeds into the creation of other services or mostly cases. If we're creating cases for a particular service, we already have a bunch of the information that we need. Um, so yeah, I mean, you can't do that with a system you can't change. So
So custom fields on the business account, and then that flows into your custom workflow, it sounds like.
yeah, pretty much. Yep.
Nice. Yeah, that's a lot of value there that you're able to tap into
hmm
by utilizing that kind of functionality.
Yeah, the automation stuff is really cool. We're just getting to the point where we have enough data that we can sort of combine it or use it in automation. So we've kind of built the framework, and now we're kind of reaping the benefits, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty fun.
And I'm curious too, you said CRM, so does that mean you're doing lead tracking? You tying it into a website at all? How far upstream do you go?
No, we use opportunities and prospects. We've not
Okay.
really gone into leads at all. Um, we also use HubSpot, so that kind of is its own little niche, and we haven't gone real far into like syncing them, just because there's a lot of other stuff to do. But yeah, I mean, at some point we probably should spend a little more time there, but we're not using leads currently.
That makes sense. I think HubSpot's probably better at that anyways when you go too
Yeah, I
far
mean, you get a
upstream.
lot more flexibility with like doing marketing type stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so, but
Yeah,
there
you hand
is
it off to the
Acumatica
ERP when
does
you've got a
have the ability to sync between HubSpot, which is not something that we have managed to set up yet, but someday, someday maybe.
So we exchange messages on the Acumatica community forums, community.acumatica.com, specifically around Amazon S3. And I'm
hmm
curious, what was the trigger for you when you were looking at that? Was your database getting out of control? And if so, like what area was it in?
um, so like I said, this goes back pretty far to like 2017 sometime. I think, if I remember right, I was looking at kind of the features or somewhere I was browsing around in the settings and it said something about external storage, and so I was looking at it and it said something about being able to use AWS, and I was like, oh, AWS is cool. I never really messed with that. I would like to see how that works. So I started messing with it and kind of looked up the billing structure, and it was kind of a pay-as-you-go thing, and it was like pennies for gigs, and I was like, I mean, I can't spend that much, right? So I just kind of hooked it up, and I was like, this is really cool. And it worked, and so I didn't really put a lot of thought into should we be doing this or not. So I'd like to say that there was like a grand scheme of like, oh yeah, this is going to be really good for our business. But I really don't think there was. I think it's kind of something I stumbled upon, and I was just like, oh, this is pretty cool. And so I started using it, and it never broke. So I had no reason not to. Um,
So this
I
was a
think
cool IT thing. It wasn't a
yeah,
business
pretty
problem that
much.
came to
No,
you.
it was not a strategic business move by any means. Um, so that's the honest truth on that one.
But you turned it on, and I assume you're Acumatica SaaS. Is that right?
No, we're
Oh, you're not.
locally hosted on-prem.
So, so for anyone listening who might be Acumatica SaaS, they now turn that off in the web.config file, but you can turn it on. You just have to send a support case in, and they'll turn it on for you. They just have it off by default. So you hooked up Amazon S3, and I think you were telling me your storage is like up to half a terabyte or somewhere in
Yeah, I
that
just
neighborhood
checked
now.
because I knew you would ask. It's at like 608 gigs, and
Okay.
there's like, what is it, 650,000 objects. So we average like 1 megabyte per file, which is mostly PDFs, is largely what it is.
Because the client I'm interested in it for is it's primarily for accounts payable. So it is mostly PDFs, and you said like 600 gigabytes or so.
Yep, 608 gigs.
So a little over a meg per file. Okay. And if it's mostly PDFs, I was actually thinking with all your email activity, I think all the attachments and all the case activity gets pushed over there as well. So that could be Excel files, that could be Word documents, not
It
just
could be.
PDFs,
Yeah, I
right?
think you're right. Um, I was thinking mostly of stuff that we intentionally store there, but that's not counting any attachments for emails or that kind of thing. You're right.
And
Yep.
as far as you know, I don't even know. As far as you know, does the email attachments get pushed over there as well? I think
I
they do.
believe so. I believe once you switch the direction in the provider, I believe anything that requires storage goes there.
Yeah, and there is
Yep.
that one-time push, so it's not just I'm now storing everything from this point forward. You have some button that you can push to
Right.
move everything that's currently in the database
Yep.
over to Amazon
Yep.
S3, and then
And
it does
actually,
it
to
going
be
forward.
honest with you, I intentionally I intentionally did that a specific way, and I have no idea if this is actually like kosher or best practice. But I switched the direction, but I never actually moved everything to S3.
The
So,
existing stuff.
right. So I
Oh,
did it at the very beginning of our implementation, or we hadn't been in the system. It wasn't live yet, I don't think. So I switched the direction, but my reasoning was all like the image files, the logos, all like the system files, or yeah, random system information that would be stored would still be in the database and hopefully be faster to load. If I don't even know if that stuff would go over to AWS, but I thought if it did, I don't really want it to have to be reloading the logo every time or something, to
oh, okay.
the from AWS. That would be, so I have no idea if that's actually how it works, but I switched the direction and never actually pushed all of the local stuff into AWS.
Gotcha.
So,
I'm curious then, since you're logged in, maybe you could do some digging here. I'm curious if you've looked at the space usage screen and looked at what your biggest tables are in the database.
are you talking in AWS or Acumatica?
In Acumatica, I think the screen is called, I think it's called space usage.
Okay,
And there's a
quickly check.
tab in there called tables. I think it's the last tab. And it'll show you the tables in the database and their sizes.
Yes. Okay.
You might have to click
size.
that button on the top. You have to like calculate the dB usage. It might take a couple minutes for it to do
Okay.
that.
Okay.
And while that's calculating, I also want to ask you, it sounds like you did this at the beginning. You've done your workflow modifications since then. And I was talking to Gabriel Machad about this, and he thought that there might be some issue with customization projects and that they start getting stored in Amazon S3. I'm curious if you've run into any problems. I assume if you've done workflow customizations, you've created customization projects since you started storing stuff in Amazon S3. And have you ever run into
Yeah.
any weirdness in that area because of it?
No.
Okay.
Not that I thought of. I never actually thought through that could be a possibility. No, I've never seen
I
anything like
hadn't
that.
either. He mentioned it, and I was like, "Oh, I hadn't." Yeah, I wasn't sure what the specific issue would be, but thought I'd
Yeah.
ask that.
Yeah. So it did finish. The largest table is SM email, which would be the emails.
That makes sense.
And it's at 5,900 megabytes, which would be almost 6 gigs.
Okay. Is your upload? I think the one that stores the attachments is called upload file revision
Upload file.
or
Yes.
upload
Okay,
file.
they're both here actually. Um, this is gonna make me a liar. Upload file revision is 600 megs, and upload file is 230 megs. So you
Okay.
you were right. This emails is by far the emails and attachments is probably by far the most storage.
So that's interesting. 600 megs is pretty good size, but that's obviously not 600 gigs. Um, so you must have had a decent amount of stuff in there before you went live, and you just never converted it over, which doesn't sound terrible.
I see what you were saying. You know what? Um, I'm trying to think. Let me quick poke in S3.
By the way, this is the kind of stuff that I love to get into on the podcast. This is not your super polished background music, blah, blah, blah. This is like,
Uh,
hey, a conversation that never would have been recorded otherwise. I want to hear the real story of the on the
yep,
street version of
yep.
Acumatica.
So there are 4 companies in our bucket in Amazon S3.
Tenants or companies
Well,
in Acumatica language, front end language.
I think they're companies. It's company IDs. Yeah, it would be companies.
Well, company ID would be when you log into Acumatica on the drop down there, you'd have different options to choose from. That would actually be the tenant.
Okay, so okay, it is tenants,
Okay.
yes,
In the
but
database, it's
in
called
the
company
database,
ID. Yes,
yes, yep.
right. Okay.
Um, so there's 4 in there, and some of them we're no longer using. So that may not be fair. In Acumatica, all of that 600 gigs is probably not, or definitely not, our
That makes sense. Yeah, because
active
that number is
instance.
total across all tenants.
Right.
You'd have to drill into that and see the breakdown by tenant.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm not sure
Okay.
exactly where all that is coming from, but there's a lot somewhere at least.
Interesting. I'm curious, what about your GL Tran? How big is that table? Curious if it's more or less than a gig. I like using that one as a gauge because it's a pretty high transaction volume. It gives you an idea of how much accounting you're doing, but it's not like a lot of data.
It is
It's
right
not.
around a gig.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. That makes sense. Interesting. Yeah, and I'm comparing that, the client that I'm working with, they're around between like 2 and 3 gigs on the GL Trans side,
Okay.
and it just kind of gives you an idea of the accounting volume.
Yep.
Um, versus the attachment volume, specifically AP.
Yep.
What about AP invoice? Do you see that one near the top at all?
I don't.
That's not surprising. I mean, you
I
guys might
see
not do a
AP
high AP
Tran,
volume.
which is
Oh, AP train, yeah. What's that one at?
180 megs.
Okay, okay. That makes sense. Yeah, you might have more complexity on the billing side than you would have on the payable side. So
Yes,
that's
I
not
believe
surprising.
so.
Yeah. Okay. Now you did bring up tenants, which is same as company ID in the database. I think we also exchanged messages about you said something happens on the Amazon side where you thought it segregates the tenants somehow.
Yeah,
Maybe give me an
so
idea of the structure there.
if I remember the conversation correctly, I said something about Acumatica support. One of the implementations that I helped with, we started out, they were SaaS, and we started out with an external file provider, and partway through they turned it off, and I didn't know why, and so it would just disappeared. So I contacted support, and they said, "Oh yeah, we turned this off." Um, and I didn't quite, from the context of the email, I didn't understand that they were just turning it off by default, and then they would turn it back on as needed. I thought they were kind of saying, "Oh yeah, we just decided at Acumatica nobody's using this, so we're gonna turn it off." And I was a little bit like, "What?" Okay, that seems awfully heavy-handed, but anyway. And they were like, "Oh yeah, are you still using this?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Oh, okay, we'll turn it back on." So I kind of thought to myself like, "Wow, I'm really, affecting change here. I'm I'm having them turn this feature back on." But anyway, it makes more sense now that it was just for their tenant or their instance. But so where was I going with that?
It did do something to the Amazon storage and how things got
Oh,
stored.
yeah, you said, or I said that they had turned it off. I commented that they had turned it off at some point, and wasn't quite sure what was going on. And you said you think they turned it off by default because if you make a test, or if you copy a tenant, or how does that work?
Yeah,
I
the
forget.
scenario I was thinking of, you got a production tenant, and then you always want to have like a sandbox or a test
Right.
tenant,
Yep.
and then you're going to copy your production tenant
Hmm.
over the top of that every now and then, every month or every couple
Yes.
months.
Yep.
So then what happens to the storage side of things?
Yeah. So I think you were saying that the files were you thinking that the files get duplicated in that situation, or they're
I
just
wasn't
directly
sure. So
tied?
what I was thinking of is that you wind up with two Acumatica tenants
Yep.
that are
And they have
both
the same
referent.
company ID.
They would have a separate company ID in Acumatica, but then my assumption, and I haven't tried it, my assumption was that you now have a copy of that PDF file in two tenants, right? And the link
Yes.
from that file back to Amazon, they're both referencing the same location in Amazon S3. So if I were to be in the test tenant thinking, hey, I'm in test, I'm in sandbox, I can do whatever I want. And if I pull up that PDF file and delete it, would it delete it out of the Amazon S3 bucket, which essentially deletes it out of production?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that because I do know that when you in S3, the tenants are, or the folders. Let me actually look up the external file screen.
Yeah, I remember your reply was something like you thought company ID was somehow involved in the structure on
Yeah,
the
but I
S3
did
side.
think then that you were right after all. I think I was wrong. Um, okay, so in the file storage preferences, external file storage, the Amazon bucket configuration looks for the bucket name and the path prefix, which is essentially kind of like a folder. yeah, with the way that S3 works. So that's the only thing that would get moved or copied into a new tenant. And so it would use the same bucket and the same basically root folder. But then in S3, it creates individual buckets based on company ID, which I believe would be the tenant ID.
Oh, interesting.
So when you do the copy function, I don't know if the files get copied or not, but if they did, it would actually go into a different bucket based on the company ID, I believe.
I'll have to test that. I never even thought that they might be copied. Interesting. It might be
I don't
smarter than
know.
I
I
thought it
don't
was.
know.
Huh. Yeah. Because
But
I know there's another piece to it as well. There's a piece on the individual files. And I can't remember if it's upload file or upload file revision, but
okay.
there's like two columns in there. One I think is called data, which is where it normally stores it. I mean, it stores the whole
Hmm.
file in the
Yep.
database, I
Yep.
think in the data field. But there's another field, I think it's called blob something, like blob handler, and that's the reference to the actual Amazon S3 file.
Okay.
And that's the link that I have always assumed would now be the same piece of data in two tenants, and why two separate tenants would be referencing the same object. But I could be wrong on that.
You know, that does kind of make sense, but now that I think about it, I think if you copy a tenant, and this is just going back on my experience, which is not very, my memory of experience, which is not very great, but if I remember right, I think if you copy a tenant and go into the tenant and try to access a file, I think it looks like the file is there, but I'm not sure you can actually open it.
Interesting.
Because I believe that it would copy the records, the database version of the records, which would say, yeah, there's a file here. But when you actually go to use the blob path, I don't believe that you would have access to it. But I could be wrong about that. I would be really curious to know as well.
Well, I'm going to do some testing and circle back. I mean, I love these conversations because it's like, is it worth the effort? You've now given me the optimism to even try it.
Mm.
Oh, that's cool. But I mean, another big question mark that I had, and why the size was important to me. I also wasn't wondering, is this one of those features that's just not going to scale up? But you're halfway to a terabyte or more than halfway, and it seems to still be working for you. Files aren't taking forever to open in Acumatica.
No, the only downside that I've recently heard, and I have no idea where in the process this is, one user was having issues with files taking a while to upload, and it was kind of in the same network infrastructure as everybody else who doesn't have problems with uploads that I've heard. So I don't think that it's actually a system issue. It might be more of a, workstation or something. Um, but I've not heard any issues with opening files. It's the only recent issues I've heard is uploading takes a little bit, up to a minute or something, 2 minutes rather than like 20 seconds or less.
So that was for
So,
one person.
right, that was for one person only.
Okay.
So I have no idea if that's related to a system thing or not, but
Okay.
definitely not opening files has never been an issue. But also our files aren't that big, like I said. So
Yeah, for PDF, especially in an accounts payable scenario, 1.5 gigs is sorry, 1.5 megs per file is I think about right. You might be in like the 3 to 4 if you had more of a high resolution, but PDFs aren't super high resolution, right? That's more like getting into pictures and things like that.
yeah, no, even a 20 megabyte PDF is really large, I think.
Yeah, that'd
I
be
don't
a lot
actually
of
do that
pages
much with
probably.
PDFs, but
I agree with you. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Yeah, well, that encouraged me to give it a shot, and I guess one last question before we move on to your development side project stuff. Are you able to pop in and take a look at your billing on your Amazon S3? So you got
I was just
608 gigs in there.
I
How much is
was
that costing
just
you?
gonna look up. I saw it. I saw the number earlier, and I was trying to remember where I saw that. Um, okay, here we go. There is This is a little bit complicated. Simple storage. Okay. Yeah, this is slightly complicated because we started using S3 because it was so cheap. We tied in S3 into our backup infrastructure, which has nothing to do with Acumatica. And we probably are storing, I would guess, a couple terabytes in a different bucket, but the cost is all lumped together. So
Gotcha. Gotcha.
our our forecasted month end cost for this month is $61. But I'm
So
guessing
less than half of that
Acumatica,
is Acumatica.
right, I'm guessing
Yeah.
Acumatica is probably, if I remember right, before we did that, which was probably 6 months ago, it was somewhere in the range of like $8.
Gotcha.
So it's very cheap.
Yeah, that's not bad. And
You wouldn't begin to touch that with Acumatica database storage.
yeah, no, I just think it makes a lot more sense to store files in that type of a way, right?
Right.
I don't think that yeah, SharePoint used to have this problem. I don't know if it still does. I'm dated on SharePoint, but it would do the same thing. It would store it in the database, and there's just like almost data integrity issues you start to run into.
Right,
It's just
right.
not a transactional database is not designed for storing files.
No,
Uh,
and it you run into like the whole like backup, uptime, that sort of thing. Like if you somehow need to restore a database, it takes worlds longer to copy it anywhere, restore it anywhere. If we had 600 gigs of, well, we agreed that it's not 600 gigs, but if we even had you know, 50, 100 gigs of files in our database, it would take, I don't know, 30, 40 an hour to just restore to just copy a backup file from one place to another, and it just gets worlds more intense.
yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah, and even if we have this issue, I need to do some testing, but even if we have this issue where you sort of sharing an S3 bucket between two tenants, just tell people not to delete files and test. I don't think that's the end of the world.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
mean, when you asked that question, I was like, I know that we had dealt with some things where it's like, so we actually had the situation where we had separate instances running on different servers or something, and we would copy a tenant or basically a whole database, back up the database one place and restore it another place. So it would be basically a direct copy. And in that situation, you do get into trouble because it does not know that it's not where it came from. And so if you did anything in one, it would absolutely affect the other. But we never really had a ton of trouble with that because basically people weren't going in to mess with files. They were going in to test transactions or, you know, run this process, release something they didn't want to get stuck with or, that kind of thing. And so files were never really a big deal to us.
yeah, and even if they store a file in that test environment, that gets stored in the same Amazon S3 bucket. It becomes like an orphan file in the Amazon S3 bucket because production doesn't know about it.
Right,
But at the
exactly.
cost that you're dealing with, it's some blob with some GUID on it
Yep.
that's sort of orphaned out there. But at the cost that you're talking about, who
Right.
cares? I'm paying
Exactly.
for a little bit more for something I'm not using, but it's
Exactly.
it's pennies, right? It's not a
Yeah,
big deal.
adding would certainly be a less problematic than deleting. Um, so
Well, cool. It's great to hear your real world experience. So, Daryl Bowman is using this at a decent scale. It's affordable and he hasn't died. Or, it seems to be working okay.
I haven't gotten fired because it's not reliable.
So, let's maybe switch gears here in the last little piece of our conversation here. You also mentioned that you're doing some development side projects. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I've always been interested in like, small business, running a business. Like, what would that feel like? What would that look like? It's it feels good to say, yeah, I own my own business. I do this and that and the other thing. So I was always kind of interested in that. I always thought it would be cool to kind of own my own business. But when you're when you're gonna do that, you do actually have to provide some kind of a service or be good at something. And so the struggle for me was always, well, what would I actually be good at? What would people want to pay me for? And so the easy answer was always like, oh, IT, people want their laptops cleaned up or whatever. And I kind of started down that road, but it wasn't really something I enjoyed that much. And so I didn't really take that real far. And then um, with the certifications and the skills that I have, I put them on my LinkedIn page. At some point, I updated my LinkedIn page, and I was like, I should put on something about having Acumatica experience. And in like the 4 to 6 to 8 months after that, it was like multiple times a week I would get these LinkedIn messages. Hey, Daryl, you look like a great fit for this opportunity here or there, doing this or that with Acumatica. And I was like, oh, this seems to be kind of a hot skill set or something. And so I wasn't really interested in switching jobs, and I didn't have, mostly it was in the developer role, and I didn't have tons of experience with development, but uh, the experience I did have was kind of in the past, and so I was like, well, it would really be a shame. And they were throwing big dollars at me, like, not offers, but if you were to get this position, you would be paid this and that. And so I was like, well, it would be a shame to kind of let that skill die if, it'd be a great career to fall back on. Um, so I was like, I really should like try to do something with this just to keep my abilities sharp. And so on the Acumatica community, at some point, somebody asked, who do people use to do development? Do they use their var or like? And so I sent them a private message and said, I don't have. It's not like something I do a lot of, but if you were interested in a customization, depending on what you were looking for, I could probably, we could talk about it. Maybe I could help you. So he kind of told me what he wanted, and um, I said, yeah, you know what, that fits me perfectly. It's not super complicated. It's something I kind of had dealt with before. I was like, I would love to do that. He said, okay, well, he'll talk to his VAR and see how long it would take them to do that. I guess, for whatever reason, he wanted to check there first. And I didn't hear anything for like 6 months. And I was like, yeah, there's no way that's ever going to happen. I completely forgot about it. And one day I got an email and it said somebody sent me a private message or something. And so I opened it and he was like, yep, we're ready to do this. We're ready to go. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't expect that after 6 months, but cool. Um, so he gave me kind of the outline of what he wanted. He's actually really good at like being very specific about this and that. And so uh, I sent him a contract. We, squared everything up, and I finished the project and got paid, and everybody was happy. And I was like, you know what? If I wanted to start a business, this would be the business to start because everybody that I have heard of is overwhelmed. All the VARs that I've heard from, or even customers talking about their VARs are overwhelmed because their VARs are trying to sell. Because, like we said earlier, VARs need to sell in order to get paid in the silver or gold tier. And so the VARs are overwhelmed trying to sell, and they don't have enough support people to come after and set them up with customizations or update the customizations as they upgrade or whatever all. And so I thought this would be a great um, a prime place to stake my claim doing small and fairly easy customizations, but doing them quickly because if you talk to your VAR, you're going to be out, 6 months at the minimum, maybe a year and a half, depending on what it is. And you're still going to be paying through the nose. So why wouldn't you pay through the nose and have it, 2 weeks from now? So that's kind of where I'm trying to go. It's very new. I started my own business, and we're just gonna see where it goes. I honestly have no idea. I don't really have high expectations as far as this is really what I'm hoping for. It's just kind of a uh, kind of something just for fun, But it's been fun so far, so I'm happy. And I don't know. We'll see where it goes, I guess.
I'll read it off your LinkedIn profile. So you're owner developer at Deft Strokes Development Co. You've been doing it since September of 2022, last month.
Yep.
It says on the Deft Stroke page, I love the screenshot that you have at the top because it's code.
Yep.
And I don't know C# code, but I can see in here select from bracket CS answers bracket. So this is
Yes.
Acumatica code, not just some random code you found on the internet.
Yep, and it's
Your
F
overview.
equal if that means anything to you.
I thought it might be. Oh, because it looked not too scary like regular
Yep,
people.
yep.
And then I see in the overview, I specialize in doing simple Acumatica customizations quickly. So you're off and running there. That looks like fun. I agree.
Yeah, I mean it's been good so far. I haven't had tons of projects. The same guy did one project for and gave me two more. And so when we're done with those, I don't know. Maybe the rest of the year will be quiet. Maybe somebody listening to the podcast will want something done, but we'll see where it goes.
But it adds some flavor, right? I mean, every job gets boring after
That's
a
right.
while, but
That's right.
you need a solid job with the family, and it's nice to have some flavor on the side to just
Yep.
keep you on your toes, right?
Yep. The job I'm in, I couldn't really ask for anything more. Like it's as far as the not necessarily the work, but the environment, the expectations of, you know, work outside of just the actual tasks. They're like I have no complaints. I have an incredible amount of freedom, but the actual work of just IT, it gets boring. It's a lot of routine stuff. Um, so I mean, I feel like this position is pretty much ideal. I'm not encroaching on any kind of it's not a conflict of interest, the job I'm
Yeah, yeah.
doing and the this kind of the side job I have. Whereas if I were to take a developer role somewhere, that would obviously be out of the question. So I'm happy where we are, and I don't know. We'll see what happens.
No, you're in a good spot. I was in a similar spot like 7 years ago. I was at a solid company, same type of thing. I mean, it would get boring, but the advantages outweighed the
Yeah.
boringness, right?
Yep.
And
For
it's a
sure.
good family job, and I started doing some stuff on the side. And I actually, I accepted another job. Was really wanting to scratch the itch, and then I unaccepted it. And when I unaccepted it, and they took me back, I wrote myself a note. Tim, this is why you should never go back into consulting full time. And I listed all my reasons why. Well, now here I am doing it full time. But
Uh,
I totally get it. I mean, actually, if it wasn't for the cash problems they were having, I would probably still be there.
got it.
I think that's the way to go. You have something kind of fun on the side, and you have something solid as a core. I think that's a great setup. That's
Yep.
awesome. Hey, I got to ask you before I let you go. So yeah, first of all, thanks for saying that. Anyone listening, you'll have Daryl's contact info on this page at augforums.com/episode 101. 101. You can reach out for any development work. I thought I'd ask you before I let you go, though. We talked briefly before hitting record about the Acumatica user group there in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Sounds like you have not attended yet. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I haven't been there yet. I just heard a couple weeks ago that it had happened, I think fairly recently, but I was not there.
As soon as we stop this recording, I will connect you with Laura Carpenter by email, who is there in Lancaster, and you can find out when and where their next meeting is.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, any other last closing thoughts you want to say before we wrap it up?
Don't
Anything we
really
missed?
don't really think so. No, I mean it's been fun. So
I think you were like, I'm not sure if I want to come on. I don't really have anything to share. And I'm like, it might only take 15 minutes. But I knew we would still fill the full hour. So
yeah,
thanks for
no, I
coming
mean
on.
it's
It always unzips the file, once you
yep,
start
yep.
going. And I love the level of detail that you were able to speak to.
Very good.
All right, man. Well, have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right. Well, that's it for now. We'll catch you on the next episode of augforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening, and take care.